At my grandson's birthday, my daughter-in-law handed me a vase, $5,000, bought with my credit card. The note, payment for the burden of having you in our lives. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled. 30 days later, I tripled their rent and watched her face crumble. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The envelope trembled in Margaret Collins's hand as if it carried the weight of a secret too heavy for her to bear. She had returned from her trip to Maine feeling light, refreshed even, after visiting her sister. But all of that peace dissolved the moment her eyes caught the number printed in stark black ink. $5,000. Her heart lurched painfully in her chest as she traced the line again, hoping she had misread it. But there it was, unmistakable, screaming at her from the page. Wentworth's Fine Antiques, with my $1,000. She couldn't breathe. Maggie had never spent anything close to that amount on a single item in her life. The rest of the bill looked familiar. Groceries, a donation to the library, a few purchases from the bookstore. All normal, all hers. But this felt like a stranger had slipped into her world and left their shadow across her life. Her fingers shook as she picked up the phone and dialed the credit card company. Every ring seemed to hammer at her ribs. Finally, a calm voice answered, and Maggie forced herself to speak. "Yes, ma'am," the representative confirmed. "The purchase was made in person at Wentworth's. The card was present, and the PIN was entered." "My PIN?" Maggie's voice cracked, thin with disbelief. "That's impossible." But even as she said it, the realization hit her like a slap. Her diary. She kept her PIN written carefully on the inside cover, hidden in the back of her bedroom drawer. No one should have known. No one except... Her stomach tightened into a knot. Vanessa. While Maggie was away, her daughter-in-law had been in the house. Daniel, her son, had insisted. "She'll water your plants, Mom," he had said gently when Maggie objected. "She just wants to help." But Maggie hadn't needed help. She had a neighbor more than willing. Still, she had agreed, as she always did when Daniel asked for something. Now she understood. The betrayal settled deep inside her as she grabbed her car keys and drove straight to Wentworth's, a shop she had never set foot in. The little bell above the door jingled cheerfully as she entered, the sound jarring against the sick heaviness in her chest. "Mrs. Collins," the owner greeted warmly, his face lighting up. "How nice to see you again." Again, Maggie's lips parted, but no words came. She had never been here before in her life. "Your daughter-in-law has excellent taste," he continued, oblivious to her confusion. "That Ming Dynasty reproduction vase she chose is one of our finest pieces." The room tilted slightly. Maggie forced a polite smile, her throat dry. "When was it purchased?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Last Thursday, just after noon. She said it was a surprise for you." The man chuckled. "Mentioned you'd be thrilled." Thrilled, Maggie swallowed hard, managing a stiff nod. "May I have a copy of the receipt?" "Of course." He handed it over and her breath caught as she saw her own name scrawled at the bottom, a forgery just close enough to pass. She left the store without another word, clutching the paper like proof of a crime. The drive to Daniel and Vanessa's house felt longer than usual. Technically, it was Maggie's house, one she owned and had rented to them at a fraction of its worth for 5 years. She had bought the property as an investment, but when Daniel and Vanessa struggled after their wedding, she had offered it to them. "Just until you're on your feet," she had said. That had been half a decade ago. The house gleamed as always, Vanessa's pride shining through in its flawless appearance. Maggie knocked, her hand trembling. The door swung open and Vanessa stood there in her polished perfection, her smile faltering slightly at the sight of her mother-in-law. "Maggie, what a surprise. Daniel isn't home yet." "I'm not here to see Daniel." Maggie's voice was steady now, fueled by something colder than anger. She stepped inside before Vanessa could respond, lifting the receipt between them. Vanessa's expression didn't waver, but Maggie saw the flicker in her eyes. "Oh, that surprise," she said lightly, a smile tugging at her lips that never reached her eyes. "It's in the living room." Maggie followed her gaze. There it was, sitting proudly on the mantel, glinting under the afternoon light. A blue and white vase, elegant, ornate. Undeniably beautiful, and undeniably not hers. Her throat tightened. "Why would you buy this in my name?" she asked quietly. Vanessa's smile thinned. "I left you a note with it. Didn't you see?" Maggie shook her head. Without hesitation, Vanessa reached into a side drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. She handed it over with deliberate care. Maggie unfolded the card, her breath catching as she read the words written in flowing script. "To compensate for the burden of having you in our lives. The least we could do." Vanessa, the syllables struck like blows. Burden. The least we could do. Maggie folded the note carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. She looked at Vanessa, her perfect smile, her polished exterior, her cold eyes, and something inside her shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was resolve. "I see," Maggie said softly, her voice steadier than she expected. "Thank you for clarifying." She turned and walked out, the image of the vase burning into her mind. But her thoughts weren't on the $5,000, nor even on the forgery. They were on the years of small cruelties, the subtle dismissals, the silent complicity of her son. For the first time, Margaret Collins saw it all clearly, and she knew she would never allow it to continue this way again. The drive back to her own house blurred into memory, every street light and passing car lost behind the storm cloud forming inside Margaret Collins's chest. She sat at her kitchen table, the cream-colored envelope still resting in front of her, its words cutting deeper than any knife ever could. "To compensate for the burden of having you in our lives." Maggie read it again, though she didn't need to. Every letter was etched into her bones now. It wasn't the $5,000 that haunted her. It was that single word, burden. She thought of James, her late husband, his laugh filling this very kitchen years ago as he fixed the loose hinge on the cabinet door. He would never have believed this day possible, never imagined that the woman they had welcomed into the family would write such venom, gift-wrapped in calligraphy. Maggie remembered the day Vanessa entered their lives. Daniel had been glowing, nervous but full of love. Maggie had smiled through every doubt, telling herself that her son's happiness mattered more than her own misgivings. She had offered them her blessing, even her house, and her quiet, loyal support. And now, after years of sacrifice, Vanessa saw her not as family, not as a mother-in-law, not even as a human being worthy of respect, only as an inconvenience. The word echoed, hard and relentless. Burden. Memories unspooled, one after another, like old photographs scattered across the table. Nights Maggie had stayed up to soothe baby Ethan when his parents needed a break. Times she had slipped Daniel money to cover bills, pretending it was nothing, though it had meant putting off her own repairs. Hours she had spent tending the very house Vanessa now claimed as hers, making sure it remained warm, safe, and welcoming. It had all been invisible to Vanessa. Worse, disregarded. Maggie rose abruptly, the chair legs scraping across the floor. She walked through the house in silence, her hand trailing along the walls she had painted herself, the furniture she had bought piece by piece when money was scarce. This home had been her sanctuary after James's death, the place where she had raised Daniel alone, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and hope alive in his eyes. She had survived too much to let one cruel woman strip her dignity away with a single note. The next morning, she forced herself to return to Daniel and Vanessa's house. She needed to see it again, to confront the truth rather than let it fester inside her. The house looked immaculate, trimmed hedges lining the walkway, fresh flowers blooming in perfect order by the porch. Vanessa's obsession with appearances never failed. Maggie knocked, and once more Vanessa answered with her practiced smile. "Maggie," she said smoothly, as though nothing at all were amiss. "Back again so soon?" Maggie's gaze slid past her to the living room, where the vase still gleamed proudly on the mantel. Its presence was almost mocking, as though daring her to speak. "Why did you buy it in my name?" Maggie asked, her voice quiet but firm. Vanessa tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I told you, it was meant to be a surprise, a gesture of gratitude." Her eyes were sharp, though, colder than the porcelain she had purchased. Maggie held her stare, unflinching. That note didn't speak of gratitude. It spoke of contempt. A faint flicker passed over Vanessa's face, then vanished behind her polished composure. She moved closer, lowering her voice as though confiding. "You've done so much for us, Maggie, letting us live here practically for free. I thought it must be such a burden for you, so I wanted to balance the scales. Honey-dipped words, carrying poison beneath. Maggie's chest tightened, but she didn't let her voice waver. You bought that vase with my money. That isn't generosity, Vanessa. That's theft disguised as kindness. Vanessa's smile faltered, but she quickly replaced it with a dismissive laugh. You're taking it too seriously. It was meant as a joke, a light-hearted way of showing appreciation. But Maggie knew better. She had lived through too many of Vanessa's carefully crafted remarks, the sly comments delivered with a smile sharp enough to cut. She thought of Thanksgiving dinners where Vanessa would casually remark, "Your stuffing is so charmingly old-fashioned," before replacing it with her own dish. The times she introduced Maggie at gatherings not as Margaret, but as Daniel's mother, as though she had no identity of her own. The Christmas when she had gifted Maggie anti-aging creams with a card that read, "Because everyone deserves to look their best," each moment alone was small, almost trivial. Together they formed a wound that had never healed. And Daniel, her son, her pride, had let it happen. He had watched silently as his wife chipped away at his mother's dignity, never lifting a word in defense. Sometimes he had offered her an apologetic glance, but never once had he spoken up. That silence now echoed louder than any insult Vanessa had ever delivered. Maggie folded the cruel note again and slipped it into her purse. She would not destroy it, not yet. She needed to keep it close to remind herself that this was not a dream, not a misunderstanding. It was proof of Vanessa's contempt, of Daniel's blindness, of her own resolve to end the cycle. She straightened her back, her voice calm. Thank you for your honesty, Vanessa. I understand perfectly now. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing as Maggie turned toward the door. The vase remained behind her, shining in the sunlight like a trophy stolen from the wrong hands. As Maggie drove home, her thoughts sharpened into something clear and cold. This wasn't about $5,000. It wasn't even about the vase. It was about years of giving and receiving nothing but disdain in return. That night, as she sat alone with a cooling cup of tea, Maggie made her decision. If Vanessa believed helping her family was a burden, then Maggie would finally let her feel the weight of what a real burden could be. The night was long and merciless. Every time Margaret Collins closed her eyes, she saw Vanessa's flawless smile and that vase shimmering on the mantel like a crown stolen from her. The note replayed in her mind, each word striking like a hammer against her chest. To compensate for the burden of having you in our lives. It was more than an insult. It was a declaration. Maggie rose before dawn, her body weary, but her spirit awake in a way it hadn't been in years. She walked through the quiet house, the ticking of the kitchen clock keeping time with her thoughts. Her late husband James's photograph still hung above the mantelpiece, his steady eyes watching her with the same kindness that had carried her through their years together. She touched the frame lightly. I won't let her break me, James, she whispered. Not anymore. Her hands carried her to the old photo albums tucked in the closet. She spread them out across the kitchen table, their worn edges soft beneath her fingertips. There was Daniel as a baby, gripping her finger with his tiny hand. Daniel at 8, missing front teeth, grinning proudly with a fish he'd caught beside his father. Then the final picture of the three of them together, taken just weeks before James's heart gave out. Their smiles, so innocent of what was coming, stabbed at her heart even now. She had been only 43 when James died, left with a 12-year-old boy and a mountain of bills. She had worked days as a teacher, nights as a bookkeeper, all to keep Daniel fed and sheltered, all to give him the education she and James had dreamed of. She had lived for that boy, sacrificed for him, and believed that when he grew, their bond would remain unshakable. But Vanessa had built a wall between them, brick by brick, cruelty by cruelty, until Maggie stood outside the life she had helped create. The weight of that realization hardened into something new. Resolve. By mid-morning, she sat in the leather-scented office of Mr. Carter, an attorney she had known casually through their neighborhood book club. His silver hair and keen eyes carried both wisdom and authority. He listened carefully as she explained the situation, her voice steady, though her hands twisted in her lap. So, Mrs. Collins, he said finally, folding his hands together, you're asking about your options regarding the rental property? Yes. She forced her voice calm. I've been charging them far below market value for 5 years. No lease agreement, just month to month. Mr. Carter nodded thoughtfully. That actually gives you flexibility. As the property owner, you are well within your rights to increase the rent with 30 days notice. And in this county, there's no cap on how much. Her chest tightened. So I could bring it to market value? He swiveled his computer screen toward her after a few minutes of typing. Comparable houses in that neighborhood are renting for about 3 times what you've been charging. 3 times. Maggie stared at the numbers, her breath catching. It was a drastic increase, one that would change everything for Daniel and Vanessa. But wasn't that the point? For years, she had shouldered the burden they refused to acknowledge. Maybe now it was time they carried their own weight, Mr. Carter's voice cut into her thoughts. It's completely within your rights. I can draw up the notice for you today. Maggie thought of the vase gleaming in Vanessa's living room, paid for with her stolen money. She thought of the note, folded neatly in her purse, every syllable dripping disdain. She thought of all the years of biting her tongue, swallowing the insults, playing the role of peacekeeper while her dignity eroded. Her spine straightened. Yes, please prepare it. He slid a freshly printed document across the desk, the words, Notice of Rent Increase, standing bold at the top. Maggie took the pen he offered, and for the first time in years, her signature didn't tremble. When she left the office, the paper tucked firmly in her bag, a strange calm settled over her. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about money. It was about reclaiming something she had almost forgotten she still possessed. Her voice. That evening, Daniel sent a text. Mom, Vanessa said you seemed upset when you visited. Are you okay? Her fingers hovered over the screen. She could pour out the truth, expose the fraud and the insult. But this wasn't a battle to fight over text messages. She typed instead, I'm fine, just had some business to take care of. There was a pause, then, love you, Mom. Maggie stared at the words, her throat tight. Love, yes, but love without respect was hollow. She set the phone aside, her decision resolute. Tomorrow she would deliver the notice in person. Her tea had gone cold again, but her heart felt strangely warm. For the first time in a long while, she was standing up, not just for her finances, not just for her property, but for herself. And if Vanessa believed she could write burden across her life, she was about to learn the real cost of underestimating Margaret Collins. So stay with me, because what comes next will shake the foundation of this family, and you won't want to miss a moment of it. The morning air carried a crispness that hinted at autumn. Margaret Collins dressed with quiet precision, her movements deliberate. She chose a simple navy dress, one she knew gave her presence without extravagance. She pinned her hair neatly, added a touch of lipstick, and fastened the pearl earrings James had given her on their 10th anniversary. She wanted strength reflected back at her from the mirror, not fragility. On the passenger seat beside her lay the envelope. Its weight was slight, but the meaning inside was heavy enough to shift the balance of her world. She drove toward the house, her house, that Daniel and Vanessa called their own. Every mile closer steadied her resolve. Vanessa answered the door in yoga pants and a fitted tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that looked as if it had been styled by a professional. Surprise flickered across her perfect face before fading into cool politeness. Maggie, again. Twice in 2 days, she said smoothly. I need a word with you, Maggie replied. Her voice held a calmness she hadn't known she could summon. May I come in? Vanessa hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course, I was just making tea. I won't be long. The living room was staged to perfection. Cushions plumped, magazines fanned across the coffee table, not a speck of dust in sight. But Maggie's gaze went straight to the mantel. The vase gleamed proudly, a sentinel of betrayal standing in the heart of the home she still owned. She turned to Vanessa, who was arranging herself gracefully on the couch. Maggie remained standing. She drew the envelope from her bag and extended it. Vanessa took it with an arched brow. What's this? Open it. The paper slid free, unfolding between Vanessa's manicured fingers. Maggie watched her eyes scan the words, saw the shift from curiosity to realization. Her cheeks flushed, her lips tightened. This is a joke, Vanessa said sharply, looking up. It isn't a joke, Maggie replied evenly. It's a notice of rent increase, effective in 30 days. Vanessa shot to her feet, the paper trembling in her grip. You're tripling the rent? Just like that? I've done my research. The new figure is market value. Market value, issue? Vanessa laughed bitterly. We're family, not some strangers you can gouge. Yes, we are family, Maggie agreed quietly, which is why I've charged you 1/3 of the market rate for the past 5 years. I've been subsidizing your lifestyle, Vanessa. Gladly because I wanted to help Daniel. But things change. This is about the vase, isn't it? Vanessa snapped. You're punishing us. Nice, Maggie said softly, her gaze steady. Is that what you call using my credit card without permission? Buying yourself a $5,000 decoration and leaving a note calling me a burden? That's not generosity, Vanessa. That's theft. That's cruelty. Vanessa's face hardened, but her eyes flickered. You've always been judgmental. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you. Maggie almost laughed at the absurdity. Judgmental? She who had given and given, who had bent herself into silence just to keep the peace, being accused of judgment. Her voice didn't rise, though. It grew steadier. This isn't about judgment. It's about respect. It's about boundaries. Before Vanessa could answer, the sound of the front door opening cut through the tension. Daniel's voice drifted in, warm and familiar. I'm home. Meeting wrapped up early. He entered the living room, his smile broadening when he saw his mother. Mom, what a nice surprise. He kissed her cheek, then paused, noticing the atmosphere. What's going on? In an instant, Vanessa folded the notice and slipped it into her pocket. Nothing important, she said quickly. Your mom just stopped by. Maggie's eyes held hers, unblinking. Then she looked at her son. His open face, the same eyes she had once wiped tears from, the same shoulders she had once carried burdens for. He deserved the truth. Actually, she said quietly, I came to deliver something, a notice that I'm adjusting the rent to reflect current market value. Daniel blinked, confusion clouding his features. Adjusting the rent? By how much? It's going up to $3,600 a month. His eyes widened. That's triple what we're paying. Yes, Maggie confirmed gently. For 5 years, I've carried the difference. I can't continue that anymore. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. Mom, that's impossible for us right now. We can't handle that. You have 30 days to make arrangements, Maggie said, her voice kind but firm. With both your incomes, you'll manage. Vanessa doesn't work, Daniel reminded her, as though she might have forgotten. Perhaps it's time she considered it, Maggie said evenly. Vanessa's cheeks flushed crimson. You're outrageous. We have a child to think about. At the mention of Ethan, Maggie's expression softened. Yes, and he deserves stability. He deserves parents who stand on their own 2 feet. This house was always meant to be temporary support, Daniel. I can't carry it any longer. Vanessa's voice rose, sharp with anger. This isn't fair. You can't blindside us like this. Fair? Maggie echoed. Her gaze locked with Vanessa's, steady and unyielding. Family should respect each other. Family shouldn't take advantage. Daniel looked between them, bewildered. What's really going on? Did something happen? Maggie took a breath, her decision clear. Yes, something happened. Why don't you show Daniel the vase, Vanessa? Tell him where it came from. Show him the note you left with it. The color drained from Vanessa's face. She didn't move. Daniel turned slowly, his eyes landing on the vase that gleamed innocently in the corner of the room. Confusion deepened across his features as he looked back at his wife. What vase? What note? The silence in the room was thick, charged, waiting to snap. Maggie folded her hands calmly before her. This was the moment. The truth was no longer hers alone to carry. The silence was unbearable. It pressed against the walls, heavy as stone, as Daniel's gaze flicked between his mother and his wife. His eyes landed again on the vase, and confusion settled like a shadow across his face. Vanessa, he said slowly. What vase? What note? Vanessa's smile faltered, her lips parting without sound. She opened her mouth to explain, but no words came. Maggie could see the cracks forming in her perfect composure. It's a $5,000 vase, Maggie said at last, her voice quiet but cutting through the air like a blade. Purchased with my credit card, without my permission. Daniel's head snapped toward his mother. What? She signed my name at Wentworth's, Maggie continued steadily, and she left a note with it, a note that said it was to compensate for the burden of having me in your lives. The room shifted in an instant. Daniel stared at his wife, his face drained of color. Is that true? Vanessa's eyes filled with sudden tears. You don't understand. She's twisting everything. Her voice wavered, desperate. I was trying to do something nice. By stealing from my mother? Daniel's voice cracked, disbelieving. I wasn't stealing, Vanessa insisted. I was going to pay her back. And the note, she swallowed hard. The note was just a joke. Show him, Maggie said softly. Show him the note. Vanessa froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Maggie crossed the room, reached behind the vase, and retrieved the cream-colored envelope that was still tucked there. She handed it to her son. Daniel's hand shook as he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words, and with each line his face grew paler, his expression hardening into something Maggie had not seen in him for years, anger. Vanessa, he whispered, his voice raw. How could you write this to my mother? She's exaggerating. Vanessa's tears spilled freely now, her mascara smudging into dark shadows beneath her eyes. It wasn't meant like that. You know how critical she's always been of me, how she looks down on me. Stop. Daniel's voice rose, firm and commanding. Just stop. He turned to his mother, his eyes filled with apology. Mom, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Maggie held his gaze, her heart twisting. This was the son she had raised, the one who knew right from wrong, the boy who had once stood up for playground friends without hesitation. She had missed him more than she realized. Vanessa's voice sharpened suddenly, cutting into the fragile silence. Fine. You want the truth? I'm tired of pretending. Your mother has been holding this house over our heads for years. Every time you mention her generosity, it feels like a chain around my neck. I wanted something in this house that was ours, not hers. That's why I bought the vase. Daniel stared at her, stunned. Mom has never... You don't have to say it out loud, Vanessa interrupted bitterly. It's in her eyes, in every sigh, every look. Poor Daniel and Vanessa can't manage on their own. Maggie's chest ached, but her voice remained steady. That's not true. All I've ever wanted was for you both to be happy. I welcomed you, Vanessa, even when you made it clear I was unwelcome in your world. Vanessa's tears turned to fire. Unwelcome? You've judged me since the day we met. My clothes, my choices, the way I raised my son. I've said nothing but tried to help, Maggie replied firmly. But help isn't what you wanted. You wanted control, so you cut me down with small cruelties. You broke my mother's teacup. You rearranged my furniture. You called my cooking interesting. You gave me wrinkle cream for Christmas. Daniel's head turned sharply to his wife. Is that true? Vanessa's face flushed crimson. She's twisting it all. No, Maggie said softly. This is the truth, and I've stayed silent for too long. Daniel pressed a hand over his mouth, grief and realization clouding his eyes. For the first time, he saw the fractures that had been widening for years, fractures he had ignored. Vanessa's voice trembled, edged with fear. If you take her side, Daniel, I'll take Ethan and go to my mother's. Is that what you want? To lose your family? The words hung heavy, a threat coded in desperation. Maggie's heart clenched, but she refused to waver. This isn't about sides. It's about respect. It's about love without cruelty. If love comes with contempt, it isn't love at all. Daniel lowered his hand, his eyes dark with disappointment. Vanessa, this has to stop. We can't go on like this. Vanessa turned away, her shoulders stiff, her perfect facade cracking. For the first time, she looked small in the house she had tried so hard to claim. Maggie stood silently, her pulse steady. The confrontation had begun, but the real battle was still ahead. Because words once spoken cannot be unsaid, and truths once revealed cannot be buried again. Stay with me, because what Vanessa says next will shatter the last illusions holding this family together, and you won't want to miss what comes after. The air in the room felt thick, as if every breath carried the weight of unspoken years. Daniel stood frozen, the note still in his hand, his expression one of betrayal and disbelief. Across from him, Vanessa's shoulders trembled, but her eyes burned with defiance. You've always looked down on me. she said, her voice sharp but breaking at the edges. From the very beginning, Maggie, you never thought I was good enough for Daniel. You tolerated me. That's all. Maggie didn't flinch. She had weathered storms far greater than Vanessa's words. I welcomed you into this family. I gave you my husband's earrings on your wedding day. I offered you this home when you had nothing. If that is tolerance, then perhaps you don't understand the meaning of kindness. Vanessa's lips tightened. Kindness? You call it kindness, but it's control. You hold this house over yourself like a weapon. Every time Daniel says how generous you are, I feel smaller. Like I'll never be more than the woman who lives in her mother-in-law's charity. Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke for the first time in minutes. Vanessa, that isn't true. Mom never. She doesn't have to say it, Vanessa snapped, cutting him off. It's in the way she looks around our home, as if it doesn't measure up. In her silence when I talk about my choices, as if she disapproves. Do you know what it feels like to compete with St. Maggie? Perfect mother, perfect grandmother. How could I ever compare? Maggie's chest ached. There was never a competition, she said softly. I've only ever wanted Daniel to be happy. That's all. Daniel stepped closer to his wife, confusion and frustration etched on his face. Why didn't you tell me this before? Why let it fester until it came to this? Because you wouldn't have listened, Vanessa whispered bitterly. You've always worshipped her. I was afraid I'd lose you if I admitted how I felt. Her words struck Maggie like a blade. Worship? She had never wanted Daniel to choose between them. She had only wanted to share him, to be included in his life as any mother would. Vanessa, Maggie said, her voice steady despite the ache. You could have spoken to me. Instead, you chose cruelty. You chipped away at my dignity year after year. That note wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was the truth you've been holding inside all along. Vanessa's composure crumbled. Tears streaked her cheeks, raw and unpolished. I was angry. I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own home. I wanted something beautiful that was ours, not a constant reminder that everything belonged to you. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at the vase, its polished surface gleaming in the light, and then back at his wife. So you stole from my mother. You forged her name. You humiliated her. That's how you tried to make this house yours? Vanessa turned away, her voice barely audible. I just wanted to matter. The room fell silent again. Maggie's eyes softened despite herself. Beneath the vanity and the cruelty, there was something more fragile. Fear, insecurity, a hunger for validation that had twisted into bitterness. But understanding didn't erase the damage. The rent increase stands, Maggie said firmly. You will pay market value or you will leave. I won't apologize for expecting respect in my own home, and I will no longer sacrifice my dignity to keep peace. Daniel rubbed his forehead, caught between two women who both claimed his heart in different ways. Mom, please, this is so much all at once. We can't afford 3 times the rent overnight. You have 30 days, Maggie replied. It's the law, Daniel. And it's fair. I've been carrying this weight for years. I won't do it anymore. Vanessa's tears slowed, but her voice hardened again. You're tearing this family apart. No, Maggie corrected gently. Disrespect tore this family apart long before today. That she gestured toward the envelope in Daniel's hand, the vase on the mantel, the broken trust hanging heavy in the air. This is only the consequence, finally arriving. Daniel closed his eyes, the reality settling over him. He had ignored the small slights, turned away from the tension, convinced himself it was harmless. But now the truth was undeniable. He opened his eyes and looked at his wife. Vanessa, you owe my mother an apology. A real one. Vanessa stiffened, her pride warring with guilt. For a moment it seemed she might lash out again, but then her shoulders sagged. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry, she whispered. For the vase, for the note, for everything. It was not enough, not after years of calculated unkindness. But it was the first crack in the wall she had built. Maggie inclined her head. Thank you, I hear you. The three of them stood in uneasy silence, the air thick with everything said and unsaid. The path forward would not be easy, it might not even hold. But for the first time, Maggie felt the balance shift. Not in Vanessa's favor, not in Daniel's silence, but in her own quiet strength. The illusions had shattered. Now only the truth remained. 3 months can change the shape of a life. For Margaret Collins, those 90 days carried both the sting of loss and the balm of renewal. The silence after the confrontation had been sharp at first, like shattered glass underfoot. But slowly it became something else. Space for clarity, for dignity, for breathing again. Daniel and Vanessa had left the house only 2 weeks after receiving the rent notice. Not to Florida, as Vanessa had threatened in her anger, but to a modest apartment closer to Daniel's office. Smaller rooms, fewer luxuries, tighter budgets. Yet it was theirs, and it forced them to stand on their own feet at last. Maggie had rented her property at market value within days. A young doctor and her husband had moved in, thrilled to pay the amount that once would have crushed her son's household. The steady income brought her unexpected freedom. She finally replaced the old kitchen counters that had been chipping for years. She bought herself new watercolor paints and brushes, indulging in a hobby she had long put aside. And quietly, with determination, she opened a college savings account for Ethan. But the greatest change had not been financial. It had been in Daniel. One evening, her phone rang. "Mom," his voice came tentative but steady. "Can we have dinner this weekend? Just the two of us." When they met at their favorite little Italian restaurant, Maggie almost didn't recognize the man sitting across from her. He looked older somehow, not from age, but from awareness. His shoulders carried weight, but also resolve. "Busy," he admitted with a tired smile when she asked how he'd been. "The apartment's smaller. We had to sell some things. Vanessa's adjusting." He hesitated, then added, "She's looking for a job, interview at a design firm next week." Maggie raised her brows, surprised. Vanessa had once spoken of being a stay-at-home mother as her calling, even with Ethan in preschool most days. Now she was stepping into something new, something of her own. "That's good," Maggie said softly, and she meant it. "She has a good eye for beauty. Maybe this will give her purpose beyond appearances." Daniel's hand covered hers across the table, his grip firm. "Mom," he said, his voice raw, "I owe you an apology. A big one." Her throat tightened. "Daniel, no, please, let me say this." His gaze held hers, earnest, almost pleading. "I let you down. I saw the way she spoke to you, the little digs, the disrespect. I told myself it wasn't that bad, that you were strong enough to brush it off. But that was cowardice. I should have defended you. I should have noticed." Tears stung Maggie's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Yes, you should have. But I should have spoken sooner too. I was afraid of losing you, of losing Ethan. I let too much slide." "You'll never lose me," Daniel said firmly. You're my mother. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered, her hand tightening around his. That night they talked for hours, not just about wounds, but about life, about his career, his frustrations, his hopes, about her painting, her book club, the kitchen remodel she was finally planning. It was the kind of conversation they hadn't shared in years. Open, honest, unguarded. Mother and son rediscovering each other. Later, Daniel asked quietly, "Natalie?" He caught himself, then corrected. "Vanessa wants to apologize too. Properly this time. Would you be willing to meet?" Maggie hesitated. The thought of seeing her daughter-in-law again made her stomach tighten. Yet refusing would only build walls higher. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll meet her." When Vanessa came to Maggie's home a week later, she was not the polished woman Maggie had always known. She wore little makeup, her hair tied back simply. She looked nervous, vulnerable. "Thank you for seeing me," Vanessa said, her voice quieter than Maggie had ever heard. Maggie poured tea, giving them both a moment. When she returned, she found Vanessa standing before the photographs on the mantel, pausing at one of Daniel holding a science fair ribbon. "He was 12 there," Maggie said softly. "The first time I saw him smile after James died." Vanessa's eyes softened. "You raised him alone from then on." "Yes, it wasn't easy, but he was a good boy. He's still a good man." They sat. Vanessa wrapped her hands around the teacup as if for strength. Her voice shook. "I owe you an apology, a real one. I've been unkind, disrespectful, ungrateful. I've felt intimidated by you, Maggie. You're so capable, so sure of yourself. Daniel admires you so much, and I was afraid I could never measure up. Instead of facing that, I tried to tear you down. Her tears fell freely now, and for the first time, Maggie saw not vanity, but honesty. I hear you, Maggie said gently. It hurt. It still does. But if you're willing to change, so am I. Vanessa nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. The walls between them had not vanished, but cracks had formed, letting light seep in. 3 months had reshaped everything. Nothing was easy, nothing perfect, but there was possibility again. Respect was not guaranteed, but it was beginning to grow. And this was only the beginning of what lay ahead. So keep listening, because the choices they make next will define not just their marriage, but the future of this entire family. The afternoon light slanted through Margaret Collins's living room, warm and golden, catching the dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. Maggie sat across from Vanessa, who held her teacup with both hands, as though anchoring herself against the tremor in her fingers. It struck Maggie how different her daughter-in-law looked without the armor of perfection. No polished curls, no flawless makeup, no carefully chosen words meant to impress. Just a woman stripped bare of her defenses, trembling under the weight of her own admission. I've always felt small beside you, Vanessa said quietly, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. You built a life alone after James died. You raised Daniel, gave him everything he needed, sent him to college. He admires you so much, and she swallowed hard. I was afraid I could never measure up. Maggie's chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with something closer to understanding. You never had to measure up, Vanessa. I never expected you to be me. I only hoped you would be kind. That's all. Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes. I know, and instead of being kind, I tried to make you smaller so I wouldn't feel so small myself. Every little jab, every so-called joke, it wasn't about you. It was about me, my own insecurity, and it was wrong. Her voice broke, raw and unpolished. I am sorry for the vase, for the note, for every time I hurt you when all you ever did was help us. The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling, waiting to be accepted or shattered. Maggie studied her face. She saw no manipulation there, no polished mask, only vulnerability. The years of cruelty could not be erased by one apology, but perhaps they could be softened by it. Thank you for saying that, Maggie said finally. It means something, more than you know. Vanessa nodded, wiping at her cheeks, her voice steadier now. I got the job, she said suddenly, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. The design firm offered me a position. It's small, just an entry role, but it's mine. My own paycheck, my own work. I feel different already. Maggie's mouth curved into a genuine smile. That's wonderful, Vanessa. You've always had an eye for beauty. Maybe now you'll have a place to use it. Vanessa looked startled at the compliment, as though she hadn't expected kindness in return. Thank you, she whispered. I'm nervous, but excited too. For the first time, I feel like I'm not just clinging to Daniel's world. I can build something of my own. They sat in quiet for a while, sipping tea, the silence not heavy, but tentative, like a bridge slowly being built between them. Maggie thought of Ethan, her grandson, his bright eyes and eager questions. She wanted him to grow in a home where respect lived alongside love, not in one poisoned by resentment. I'd like Ethan to spend more time with you, Vanessa said suddenly, her voice soft. He misses you. He asked for his grandma. Maggie's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I would love that, she said, her voice trembling, despite her effort to keep it steady. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Perhaps this was how healing began. Not in grand declarations, but in small, quiet offerings. Months later, Maggie sat in a row of folding chairs at Ethan's preschool graduation. The children marched proudly across the stage in paper caps, their voices bubbling with laughter. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting on his son's shoulder, while Vanessa leaned forward, beaming with genuine pride. After the ceremony, they all went out for ice cream. Ethan chattered excitedly about kindergarten and his new puppy, his chocolate-streaked grin lighting up the table. We have some news, Daniel said, his arm around his wife. Vanessa's been promoted. senior designer after just 6 months. Maggie turned to her daughter-in-law, her smile warm. That's incredible, Vanessa. Congratulations. Vanessa flushed, a shy, unguarded smile breaking across her face. Thank you, and there's more. We're buying a house. A small one, but it's ours. With both our incomes, we finally qualified. Pride swelled in Maggie's chest, not for the money, not for the independence, but for the strength it represented. They were building their own life now, no longer leaning on hers, no longer mistaking generosity for weakness. That calls for a celebration, Maggie said softly. Maybe I can host a housewarming once you're settled. I'd like that, Vanessa replied, and her eyes told the truth this time. As they walked to their cars, Ethan slipped his small hand into Maggie's. Grandma, he said brightly, can I come stay at your house next weekend? Daddy said you have paints now. Maggie laughed, her heart swelling. Yes, sweetheart, I'll teach you watercolors. We'll make something beautiful together. When she glanced at Vanessa, expecting resistance, she found something else entirely, acceptance, even a touch of pride. For the first time in years, Maggie felt not like an outsider to her son's family, but a part of it. Not as a burden, not as an afterthought, but as herself, respected, seen, loved. The years of tension seemed like a distant storm now, their echoes fading into memory. Margaret Collins sat on her back porch one quiet evening, the scent of jasmine drifting from the garden, her brushes rinsed and resting in their jar after a day spent painting. The canvas before her glowed with soft hues, sunset over the lake, a scene that mirrored the peace she was beginning to claim. A knock at the screen door startled her from her thoughts. Daniel stepped in, carrying Ethan on his hip. Vanessa followed, a basket of strawberries cradled in her arms. Thought we'd stop by, Daniel said with a grin. Ethan insisted. Grandma! Ethan wriggled free, running into her arms. Maggie hugged him tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. His laughter, pure and unburdened, filled the air with music. Look what I painted at school, Ethan announced, pulling a folded paper from his backpack. The colors were bold, messy, but brimming with joy. It's our family, Mommy, Daddy, me and you, Grandma. Maggie's heart ached at the sight. For all the years she'd been worried about being erased, here she was, drawn in bold crayon strokes at the center of her grandson's world. That's beautiful, sweetheart, she whispered, kissing the top of his head. They ate strawberries together on the porch, juice dripping down Ethan's chin as the sun slipped lower on the horizon. Vanessa sat across from her, her posture relaxed, her smile genuine. Your flowers are lovely, Vanessa said softly. I've been trying to keep some alive on our balcony, but they don't last long. Maggie chuckled. They just need patience, water, sunlight, and time. That's all. Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no sharpness, no hidden blade behind the words, only understanding. Later, when Daniel carried Ethan inside for a bath, Vanessa lingered on the porch. She set her empty cup down and turned toward Maggie. I know it'll take time, she said carefully, but I want us to have a real relationship, not just for Daniel, not just for Ethan, for us, if you're willing. Maggie studied her daughter-in-law's face. She saw sincerity there, fragile but true. Slowly she nodded. I'm willing. Vanessa exhaled, as if releasing years of held breath. Thank you. When she left, Maggie remained on the porch, listening to the night settle around her. Crickets sang in the distance, the last streaks of orange fading into indigo. She thought of James, of the long years she had walked alone, of the mistakes she had made, and the strength she had found. She had nearly lost her son, nearly lost her place in his life. But through truth and pain, something new had taken root. The road ahead would not be perfect. It would have bumps, disagreements, fragile moments where old wounds threatened to reopen. But tonight there was hope, and that was enough. Maggie turned back to her canvas, dipped her brush into gold, and added the last stroke of light to her painted sky. Life has a way of testing the bonds we believe unbreakable. For Margaret, those tests came through betrayal, silence, and the ache of being misunderstood. But she discovered that respect, once demanded, reshapes love into something stronger. Her voice, once silenced, had become her strength, and in using it, she reclaimed her place, her dignity, her family. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt underestimated, unseen, or dismissed, Share your thoughts below. Your words matter. Your voice has power. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength we carry within.